Welcome everyone to our Women in DevOps event, Why Neurodiversity and Mental Health Matter. This is one of our first hybrid events that we've hosted, which is super exciting. For those of you who are new to Women in DevOps, we are a community platform with an aim to help close the gender gap and inspire the future leaders of the DevOps world. Our unique platform has become a global movement and is used to not only amplify the voices of women, but of all minority groups within tech, to break down the barriers and drive positive change. I'm thrilled to be joined by a panel of thought-leading experts to discuss ways in which organizations can be neurodiverse, inclusive, and best practices to attract neurodiverse talent during the hiring process. Throughout the discussion today, we are going to conduct some polls that we would love for you to get involved in. You can answer these on our Slido, which you can reach via the QR code on screen, or go to www.slido.com. It will be on the next slide in a second, and you can use the code #WomenInDevOps. Please feel free to also submit any questions on there as well throughout the discussion, and either we'll answer them throughout or we'll be asking them at the end. To set the agenda for the evening, you can expect around 1 hour of a panel discussion, followed by the live Q&A that I've just mentioned, and networking for those of you that wish to continue the conversation. To introduce myself before I hand over to everyone, I'm Francesca, your host for the evening, and I'm the co-founder of Women in DevOps and look after the UK arm of the community. Having previous hosted events, prior to COVID, the last in-person events that we did were with Monzo, Condé Nast, and Financial Times. I'm not only passionate about diversity and growing diversity within the DevOps space, but creating awareness across the whole of the tech industry. So it's my pleasure to introduce you, Georgina, our chair for the evening.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you so much for joining us. For me, this is a super important part of the conversation. I just need to read into or speak into the microphone. So I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of myself, and then I'm going to introduce you to the panel, and then we're going to get into a discussion, which is very exciting. So as I said, I'm Gina. I work for a technical consultancy called Equal Experts, and I was diagnosed with ADHD last year. So I've spent 30 years of my life feeling like I'm a juxtaposition of a human being, not really knowing who I am and fitting into this world. And I've been on a journey over the last year to understand a bit more about my brain. And yeah, that's my reason for being here. So thank you very much. I'm just going to introduce you to the panel.
Hello? Yeah, sounds better, sorry. So yeah, I've been an engineering manager for about a year here at Funding Circle. And the reason why I really wanted to participate today and to talk about this topic is because I myself have been dealing with depression and anxiety for a while in my adult years. And I also have a 9-year-old niece who has autism. So both those experiences have made me really passionate about talking about this, making the industry, but also the society in general, a bit more inclusive about this. So yeah, I think that's me.
Hi, everyone. Hi, my name is Ruth-Ellen. I work for a company called Exceptional Individuals, where we help with recruitment and sort of helping people who are neurodivergent in the workplace. I'm a Chief Innovation Officer. I'm really passionate about this subject because I'm neurodivergent myself. My 22-year-old son is neurodivergent, and all the people that we work with are neurodivergent. So it's just a recurring theme. And mental health is a massive topic for many of our clients and candidates that we work with, purely because of the intersectionality piece. So just, yeah, really excited to dive in and talk about this subject.
Hello, I'm Mhairi. So I'm based in a software company called Habu in Bristol. We do logistics and fulfillment for small to medium businesses. So we're looking towards our CDC funding. So we're at a scale-up stage at the moment. Originally from Glasgow. I am not diagnosed with any neurodivergence, but I have had complete strangers come up to me and say that I am giving them ADHD vibes. So sensing there might be a wee theme there. And yeah, I've struggled with depression and anxiety pretty much most of my adult life. So yeah, I'm really keen to talk about that with everybody here today. Probably overshare occasionally, so you're welcome. I will also be oversharing, so welcome everybody. Before we get into the topics, there is a poll here. Has everybody seen it, used it, or do I need to explain it? I'm going to explain it. So there is a poll. So there's a poll hopefully running on Slido at the moment of, do you feel that your company supports neurodiversity in the workplace? There is three answers: not sure, no, and yes. This is the first time I've used Slido. This is very exciting. So while that's going on in the background, I'm going to start with our first question. So neurodiversity and mental health is becoming a much bigger and more recognised conversation. And there's a company called HR Zone. And this year they said, we need to stamp out neurodiversity stigma. And one of the things that I've noticed in the team, especially when it comes to psychological safety for neurodivergent people and non-divergent, there isn't a word, around psychological safety, is I was in a team a little while ago where people were feeling, everybody was super quiet. Nobody wanted to say anything. And I was in the same call with people every morning at 9:15 and nobody wanted to explain what they were doing. So someone in the room was saying, actually, maybe we could start telling dad jokes in the group. I'm a big fan of dad jokes. They're very silly and they always make me really happy. So those conversations have been going on for the past two or 3 months now, and the team feel like it's becoming a psychologically safer space. So people are opening up, and it all starts with something, to me anyway, really small, about being able to give a little bit of yourself to let other people feel as though that they can fill that space as well. So my question to the panel, whoever wants to take this first question, go for it, is how can organisations be part of breaking the stigma and also help foster psychological safety?
I think there's there's lots of approaches to this, I think. And you might have to repeat the question because, yeah.
I can repeat it again.
Well, just in terms of the psychological safety piece, which I do remember, is more so around knowing that psychological safety looks different for everyone. And oftentimes, it's not about just psychological safety, but also having spaces where people can be brave as well to share their truth. And oftentimes, even though the space might be safe, people aren't very brave in that space because they feel like even if I do share my truth or what I'm feeling and how I don't feel like I belong, there still might be people in the room that don't necessarily understand that and help a person to belong. So in terms of helping a person or an organization forward steps, I think it's almost having that ethos, that mantra or agreement that everyone says, this is what psychological safety looks like for me, and contributing that as a team rather than coming from a top-down approach. It has to kind of come from a bottom-up because everyone's interpretation of safety looks different. The other part of the question?
That was both bits. Nice.
Okay, cool.
And I think also to add on to that, it's about revisiting that all the time because psychological safety isn't the same for everybody. And if we've got a set of 5 values that we believe in as a company and we never revisit it, then that stuff just gets left in the corner with some dust, whether it's on the internet or in a corner on the floor. It's about revisiting those things as a team, and also to help your companies break the stigma at a high level within your business. Those things should be rooted in kindness. Oh, I got very excited now. So next question. I felt that this is so exciting. How can psychological safety impact the conversation around neurodiversity and mental health?
Well, I think that the fact that there's psychological safety in your organization, in your work, on your team, will make it like we participate to breaking the stigma. So people will talk about it. And by talking about it, it will be more likely that they get help, they get reasonable adjustments, which I think we will talk about at some point later. But those are the things that become more normal. Like, I don't think most places, nobody flinch if you say, I don't have my broken leg, I can't come to work tomorrow. It needs to become that level of normal to say it also for neurodiversity and mental health. So if you get to the point where there is that psychological safety in your team or organization, it makes it more likely that those will become the norm.
When these things become normal, people, I don't know, the space doesn't necessarily always need to be spoken about because people feel like, oh, I can have a sick day. So sometimes sick days are not just about, like you said, a broken leg. Sometimes I get so burnt out that I just need to sleep for a day, and to be able to say to the company that I work for, actually, I'm not having a good time right now, I need to sleep. And that's a really scary thing for me to say to some people. And the environment that I work in now, I'm actually really lucky to be able to say that to the people around me. It's not a good day today, or it is a good day. And the more we start speaking about that in a small team level, the more we open up the space for other people in our teams to say the same thing.
I just wanted to add to that, just even from just a base human level, this is where diversity in general is really, really important, because if you're hiring different people with different personalities, and this is where I don't want to answer all the questions going forward, but this is where if you're looking out for different personality traits and trying to kind of get a balance within that team, you're always going to get people that don't want to share stuff, and that's absolutely fine. But if you've got people in that team that are chronic oversharers like me that will tell people stuff, it sets a precedence that it's like, well, that person shared something, so, and they didn't get judged. So if I ever do need to share something, that example's been set. So this is why you need a mixture of people, because you will get more outspoken people that will set that precedence. And if you've got that all the way through the organization, bottom up and top down, that example is being set throughout the entire culture and permeates through. And I think it is just that kind of building a place of non-judgment for me.
And I think from a leadership perspective, touching on the, not everybody's going to say what's on their mind at all times. I chronically overshare all the time, and not everybody does. And to be able to create that space separately outside of a team environment to ask someone, are you okay? Because someone isn't always going to say something in a room, and that human beings are different. If you meet one neurodiverse person, you meet one neurodiverse person. And it's the same with neurotypical people. Not every neurotypical person is the same, and not every neurodiverse person is the same. We're all people and we're all different, and that's one thing that we share, and it makes us special as human beings.
Just add something from the previous question. So has anyone done improv before? Show of hands. Do you remember the yes and game where you have to keep the ball going? When psychological safety is in its sort of prime, you get to say yes and. So somebody contributes something to a meeting, you say, what I love about that idea is, and then you almost add to it. You're not minimizing the contribution, you're acknowledging it and you're building upon it. So no idea is silly, no idea is ridiculous. It's almost like I get to acknowledge another individual's perspective and also add to it. And I think that's a really good, easy way to add psychological safety into the workplace as well.
Also a really helpful tip for people, if we're going to try and give tips throughout this as well. And back to something we were talking about earlier, many people identify as neurodiverse without a formal diagnosis. For example, as I said in my introduction, I have ADHD and I was diagnosed last year. So up until that point, I was looking at TikTok and Instagram and going, how do you know me better than a doctor? And so, completely lost my train of thought now. I'm going to ask the question. That's awful. My right's terrible, sorry to me. Why is it important to support people throughout their journey of diagnosis? So some people will get diagnosed and go through that process, but for me, I found it actually quite a difficult process. And having friends around me to support me through that was really, it made it a bit easier. We can go into that probably on a one-on-one. I'm not going to share my whole life with everybody. So I'm going to ask the question again. Why is it important to support people through their identification process as neurodiverse? Because it goes back to the that sort of space.
I think it's about not dismissing or invalidating people. And again, this goes with neurotypical as well as neurodiverse people. I think nobody wants to have their experience invalidated. And I think even now, I'm like my brain, there's this horrible little voice at the back of my head that's like, you're a total imposter sitting up here, like, you know, and actually it's quite an emotional thing trying to get to know yourself. before you die. So, you know, it's very short. So you've only got a limited time in which you can get to kind of know yourself, and it's just kind of learning a bit more about yourself so that you can kind of manage it on a day-to-day basis. So I think if someone that's not diagnosed, it's really hard to get diagnosed unless you've got the money to pay for it privately. So it's just not dismissing people's experiences, and which again links back to that psychological safety of people being able to express themselves without judgment. And I think if you can, so addiction, there's an author whose name has completely left my head, who writes about addiction. He's like, the opposite of addiction is isolation, so people withdrawing from them, and it's a similar thing. He wrote a book about the lost connection as well, or about depression and anxiety, and I think it's Johan Harris, I don't know why I'm looking at you.
I don't know either.
But anyway, again, it's like if you cut people off, like you're cutting off opportunity, and you're cutting, you know, we're social beings. It has a lasting impact on people, and it has a lasting impact in the conversation. So it's about opening up and not dismissing and judging people, which in turn, you know, that link between ADHD and autism and depression and anxiety, you're kind of helping to break that cycle. So if there are people that support you, it helps break that cycle, because there's research to say the response of your stress response, once you release cortisol and things like that, you actually release oxytocin afterwards. And there's research that suggests that's why you reach out to people. That's why that's part of your stress response. So by cutting people off and by judging them or dismissing them, that whole oxytocin part of their stress response is, you know, and then it goes into a vicious cycle. And you know, we are social creatures, so that's really important for us as a society. So I hope that made sense. It's not particularly articulate, but yeah, we are social beings, so any kind of support is important. If anyone wants to add to that can be a bit more articulate.
I'm not sure if I'm going to be more articulate, but I can add. So I think the journey to diagnosis can be a traumatizing one. I remember when I went to get my diagnosis, and it was just this really small room, and I got it because I was doing a qualification in teaching. And they said, oh, you get to do, we do diagnosis. They said, you can find out if you're dyslexic and dyspraxic. So I said, okay, great. Get to do it for free. I don't have to pay. Fantastic. But I was like 2 or 3 hours in there. And I was asking me all of these questions. I had no idea. And I felt really uneducated at the end of it. And then when I got the diagnosis officially over the phone, she was like, of course you're dyslexic and dyspraxic, probably ADHD too. And that's how it was delivered. And I was like, oh, okay. And so the whole process is quite traumatizing, and then not knowing who you are and thinking which part of me is actually neurodivergent, which part of me is not. And then having that whole, I can forgive myself for that because that's part of my neurodivergence. And so I think it's important to support an individual, because it's hard to go through that process, let alone all the barriers that come with it, and the dismissal that you have when you want to go for the diagnosis, especially with our NHS system. Sometimes it's not the best. So I just think that compassion is needed, because it stops people from feeling like they're wrong for being themselves.
That goes into like the forgiveness of yourself, to not, I don't know, when you go through these diagnosis processes, it can be, as you said, it can be really difficult to go, oh, I've spent this long trying to figure out who I am, and then you have to go through that process all over again. So when you can open up that to yourself and someone else is supporting you, and if anybody wants to talk about this on a one-on-one basis, I'm more than happy to overshare on a different level, probably not so much in a really big room. Talking about ADHD, actually, it was recognised as a condition in the UK in 2000, and in adults it was in 2008. It was actually identified in the early 1900s as a condition. And it feels like more and more is being found out each day. And a lot of that, it feels like it's being community-led. So people are understanding more about their own neurodivergence, and they're sharing their journeys and they're sharing those experiences. And events like this, thank you so much for coming and listening to us, to be able to share that kind of information so people can feel like they're not alone in this journey. So the question, I don't know why I keep saying the question, sorry about that. Maybe by the end of it, I'll forget to say it. Why is funding research and action so important? through the diagnosis process. Oh no, actually, ignore that. Let's take a second, folks. Let's take a second. I'm talking about ADHD and diagnosis. Why is funding, research and action so important when it comes to ADHD?
Everybody wants to take it. Okay. I think funding full stop helps to raise awareness. There's often times when parts of our society that it almost seems like we're invisible. And I think the more research that is done, the easier it's going to be for people to get the right support. Even though there's times when we're coaching people at EI and we're training people on awareness, without more funding for certain initiatives, everyone doesn't get to have access to that. And I think it just makes us have a more equitable world when funding is actually implemented and distributed and shared with different parts of society, because at the end of the day, we just don't have equality. We don't have equity in certain spaces, and without that funding, people won't ever get access to it. So I'm not necessarily the best person to answer this, because I feel like everyone should get a diagnosis as soon as they're sort of out of the womb, or at least get a test to an extent, and everyone should get support. But that's not what happens at the moment. We don't get that because of the way different areas we live in and our different ethnicities and everything else. So I think the funding has to be equitable as well. It can't just be on a certain demographic, and it can't just be shared with certain people either. It has to be equitable, or there's no point. It feels like it might just go to another part of society that already have access to quite a lot already.
I was just going to say, this is where workplaces and things could take their kind of corporate social responsibility. I do think, you know, for example, software developers, they're in short supply, it would seem, compared to the amount of jobs that are out there. I think if you want diversity and you want to be able to include people and get that kind of spread across your team, because people talk about diversity a lot, I think this is where that funding could come into place to support people. Like, I feel very lucky our work have just brought in healthcare, which includes mental health, which I think is great, but not everybody's got that. So I think this is where some of the bigger companies that do have that disposable that they could maybe put towards that, they could invest back in people and invest back in those communities that don't get the support. Because I would say I was in a very privileged position and I can't afford a diagnosis. There are people out there that will never even get a look in our NHS. I think it's 2 years, they told me.
And it's also getting,
and it's probably getting longer. And the government don't look like they're going to be putting any more funding into the mental health aspect of the NHS, let alone, you know, A&E. So yeah, I think this is where workplaces and companies could start to like really grab the bull by the horns and start to invest in back in that stuff. But you know, it's easy to say because I don't own a company, but one day. But if I did, one day. Yeah, Angeline, I don't know if you did you want to add, not put you on the spot? Like,
not much to add, just that I feel like investing in funding is also part of breaking the stigma, right? Because by putting money and investment or funding into those topics, then it also contributes to breaking the stigma.
It's also something we're going to touch on in a little bit later around how diversity actually impacts the bottom line in a really positive way. So stay tuned. And if people are struggling with their diagnosis or would like to know more about diagnosis of ADHD, of autism, or any of the neurodiverse things we're talking about today, what are some of the resources available to people? I can talk about some Instagram people that I love. So I've started following a lady called Ellie Middleton. So she started her journey with autism and ADHD last year, and she is an absolute powerhouse in using her voice to raise other people up. I would highly recommend following her on any social media channel. She is incredible. And she also led me towards a lady called Leanne Maskell, who identifies as having ADHD. She's also an ADHD coach. And again, uses her platform and her diagnosis to elevate other people's voices. And I think going back to one of the things we were saying earlier, that community and the ability to use your voice to elevate others who feel that they may not have a psychologically safe space is super important.
Me again. So I'm always going to plug Exceptional Individual because that's who I work for, but also the fact that we offer free coaching to people that are not in work, because it's career coaching full stop, people that are in work, so that are neurodivergent specific. And I feel like 80% of our team are neurodivergent, so that helps when it comes to that lived experience piece, but many of them that are not also have like really great insights into what could be helpful to support a neurodivergent individual in the workplace as well. I feel like when it comes to being neurodivergent, it's about knowing who you are and having that space to excel in your strengths. And oftentimes, if you are not supported in the right way, you can feel like you haven't got any strengths. And there's massive strengths that you do have, and you need that reminder, you need that advocate and ally to help you to remember that. And I think it's important to have the influencers, definitely, to do that. But I think also just to have that one-to-one support is so important. And you can go through Access to Work, get that workplace needs assessment and get that training and coaching for awareness for your organization. But I think when it comes down to it, it's about what are you gonna leave the world with? Is it gonna be that version of you that excelled and because you shared your strength, or that person that always apologized because of not knowing who you are? And I think it's just important to understand the difference.
Leads really nice into the next question around challenges that neurodivergent people face every day. So things like focus, concentration, social interaction, hyperactivity, which I'm guilty of all of these things, to name a few. But actually going back to that strengths thing, for me, sometimes my lack of focus means that I focus on the things that are really, really important to me. So there are some things I can't and don't focus on, but actually that leads me to be able to focus on the things that I really care about. So for example, alongside work, I also run a charity, my co-founder is in the audience, and we set that up alongside work. So we support people in the Republic of Srpska in Bosnia into education and into technology roles. So I focus on that as well as a full-time job because I'm super passionate about it and I'm super focused on that thing. So just because somebody has a lack of focus doesn't necessarily mean that they're unfocused. It means they're focusing on things that other people may not think are the necessarily right things. But I think that goes back into the strengths piece of owning the things that you know about yourself. And what are the things that workplaces can do to support people in this space?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that organizations should look at doing, like what we tend to call a reasonable adjustment, not nearly like logistical way, but looking at having that conversation with how people do best about focus, about communication, in those one-on-one conversations you were talking about earlier, maybe with your manager or with your teammates, telling them, this is how I work best. I need XYZ, I need silence to work better. I work better when I work from home. Or on the contrary, I work better when I'm in the office. Like having those conversations, making that part of nearly getting to know your colleagues, that should be part of the nearly the onboarding discussion. Yeah, how do you communicate? How do you want me to talk to you about your performance? How do you want me to talk to you about work assignments? Like having those conversations about how do you work with people and how they prefer to be, and I think communicate with them.
And I think also as leaders, we're absolutely responsible for facilitating those conversations because not everybody knows how they work best. It's not something we're taught at school. You're taught at school to do a whole bunch of things that you may or may not want to do, and then you're free to go off in the world. So when we are in workspaces, leaders are absolutely responsible for helping facilitate those conversations around reasonable adjustments.
And showing also like leading by example, yourself, telling your team, telling your teammates, this is how I like to work. This is how I like to communicate. This is how I prefer doing X, Y, Z, like showing by example so that they feel safe. I think we're circling back to psychological safety there, but this is a good example. If you show by example, this is how I like to be receiving feedback. This is how I like to focus, etc., etc. Then you show example, and it is more likely that they will feel safe doing the same.
I was just going to say, like, one thing I'm very aware of is sometimes I am quite opinionated and extroverted compared to a lot, especially in software. compared to a lot of my colleagues. So that was one of the first things when I got plonked into a new team and I got sat next to my colleague, Tom. Shout out to Tom. His desk is very clean, very minimal. So one of the first things I asked him, mine's is covered in plants. So one of the first things I asked him, some of which are dying, upsettingly. One of the first things I asked him was, right, Tom, because he's a senior dev, what do you want me to do when I need help? If your headphones are on, does that mean don't knock, nobody's in? Or how do you want me to like interrupt you? Because I'm very aware that I could start a conversation in an empty room. I'm not joking. So like I could just turn it away to someone and, you know, be completely oblivious to actually them needing me to shut up. So I'm really aware of asking people, how do you want me to communicate with you? And I think that's such a good question to ask someone. Some people are more introverted than others. One of the worst things you can do to an introvert is put them on the spot in a meeting. You know, you really have to try and kind of just like, if people want to speak, let them speak, or if they want to come to you after. Do people want the information sent to them before the meeting so that they can digest some of it? Sometimes you're not always organized enough to do that, but if you can, that might be something that you want to think about. It's just little things. Other people prefer to think on the spot, so don't judge them if they come up with a half-baked idea, because that is their process of thinking. So it's just being very aware that people are different from you. And I think, again, by leading by example within the teams, both kind of bottom up and top down, and by creating that diversity within the teams, you can kind of start to have those conversations, because people start to realize, oh, actually, you're not the same as me. Should probably not just yell at you when you've got your headphones on. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, I think for me, it's asking people how they like to be communicated to.
And I think it's also a celebration of strengths thing, and to be that self-aware, to know how you communicate. And it again normalizes that conversation around saying to someone, this is how I like to communicate. And then you open the door and you open the space for other people to say the same thing to you. A conversation around hybrid working. So Glassdoor this month revealed that the conversations around hybrid working in review sessions are up by 16,000%. And this is Glassdoor. So this is one website on the internet that lots of people know about. So that's just the conversations that people know are happening. So hybrid working is a massive topic for people nowadays. And it's not the new normal, but we've been doing it for 2 years. It's a thing. Hybrid working is a real thing for people. And what can organisations do especially when considering neurodivergent folk in hybrid work environments? I think we've touched on quite a lot of these things, but maybe round it into the hybrid working space.
Well, I think it can be, and it should be probably part of the conversation I was mentioning earlier. Like also, like, do you work better when you're at home with assuming silence and focus, or do you work better in the office when you can collaborate a lot and be among people and be socially interacting with people directly face to face, or for a lot of people somewhere in between? Best of both worlds approach. So having that conversation and be open about what works well for those people and for those teams, I think is also important.
And also realizing it can be really hard for people to work in a hybrid way. Like some people want to work at home, some people want to work in the office. So when you're facilitating a meeting, for example, when some people are at home and some people are in the office, the logistics involved are actually really different. So a real practical tip is when there's 5 people in an office and 1 person at home, it's a remote first principle. Everybody should be looking at their laptop. They shouldn't be talking. And I know you couldn't hear me, I did that on purpose. Because the person on the web, they can't see you because you're having a one-to-one conversation. And actually, it's really interesting. It's changing human behavior. We're seeing a real change in how human beings are interacting with each other, and to work with it rather than to work against it. People want to work from home. People want to work from the office. How do we as people, how do we as leaders in our worlds enable that kind of thing to happen? And I think remote first principles in a meeting, for example, should be best practice. It should be something that we adhere to as a baseline of conversation in a hybrid fashion.
So one of the things that's been really helpful for some of the people that we work with is just having something really simple, like having the captions on when they're in Zoom meetings, because it helps them to follow along if they've got auditory processing disorder, and they find that they're able to keep up with other colleagues who sometimes very hard for them and difficult for them to understand because of the whole technology piece. And And I guess when it comes to the hybrid, it's just being able to adapt and understand that actually, just like you've already mentioned, having a user guide of what's helpful for that inclusive conversation in the workplace. But I guess something just to go back to the mental health pieces, which is really important, is having a mentor or a person you can have a virtual tea with. I mean, who here would say they've got an ally in a workplace? Show of hands. Some, yeah, right. So how important is that to have an ally, a person that's there that you can kind of bounce off your ideas and concerns, and who can advocate for you in the space when you're not in the room, and really share some of the concerns that perhaps you don't always feel psychologically safe enough to share. And I think those things in a hybrid working world are helpful, because it's often draining when you're neurodivergent sometimes to have those conversations, because you're often just frightened just to be heard sometimes. So I think it's important just to have that mentor, have that ally advocate, but also have connections and virtual teams of people. In the organization I work with, we have one team in-person meeting a month where we all come together. And in between all that, we make sure that we have consistent weekly meetings together online. And that helps us to connect in a different way.
I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I went a bit feral in lockdown, I'm not going to lie. And I think even just neurotypical people, do you know what I mean? Everybody needs you just need to get, like, we're social beings, you just need to connect. So I don't think there's a lot of parallels. I don't think this is just neurodivergent people. So I think that's such an important point to raise, is it's not like people are aliens that are completely different, and one neurodivergent person isn't the same as another, the same as one neurotypical person isn't the same as the other, but we all usually need an ally. And it's just even like other practical things like this, the acoustics, the dampening above our heads is lovely. We're actually doing a whole building review in our offices right now, because the acoustics in the room are terrible. So if you've got any auditory sensitivity, or we've got someone at our work who's deaf actually, so even just things like that, like just practical simple things like this is so cheap. Like you can stick that in a meeting room and people can hear at home much better than when you're in echoey glass meeting rooms. The worst for acoustics, are awful. So just little practical things like that aren't a huge investment, but can actually just make it easy for everybody. So yeah. Oh, inclusive design, don't even get me started. Yeah.
I think when people think about these things, I think they're massive. It's such a big thing. We have to write reams of documentation and go through millions of books to get to a point where the space is friendly for people. But I don't know how much this stuff on the roof costs, but apparently it's cheap, and it makes a difference.
Yeah. Sorry, people buy it for their studios at home. Do you know what I mean? Like, stick some sponges on the wall, it's fine. There's audio files all over that want to kill me right now. Sound engineers raging at me.
I'm not a sound engineer, so I don't know. So I think it's fine. We should just put the
props
stuff
to any
everywhere.
sound engineers out there. Sorry.
One of the things we were talking about earlier, we haven't touched on it, but actually, this is a really strange thing being in front of 3 people, and I don't even know how many people are online. Talking about how different people process information, and we use the phrase in businesses soft skills quite a lot, and also for me, interesting. I keep losing my train of thought. I'm a really competent human being, I promise. I'm just going to read the thing on a piece of paper. So in 2021, Forbes highlighted the challenge of the use of soft skills in interviews. There are a set of unwritten rules that can also highlight marginalisation, and Deloitte this year wrote a really beautiful article on this called "A Rising Tide Lifts All Boats." And the article is around creating a better working environment for all by embracing neurodiversity. So firstly, what do we mean about soft skills? They can be things like time management, negotiation, listening, and some of those things for different neurodivergent people can be really hard. For example, me, time management is absolutely awful. So I'm always half an hour early anywhere, and I'm looking at my watch 1,000 times by the time I've left my house. When I put my shoes on, I double check that I've got my keys, I've got everything. Oh, it's a long process for me to leave the house. And I'm always checking my watch to make sure I'm at a place on time. And that's a structure that I've built for myself over years of not knowing the concept of time, which is also a creation. Someone created time to put us in these boxes. So when I need to be somewhere, I'm at least 30 minutes early because I am petrified of being late. So whistle-stop tour of my brain. How can we support people, especially in the hiring process when it comes to soft skills? Not everybody thinks in the same way. Not everybody behaves in an interview in the same way. And one of the discussions we were having earlier is around interviewing being a skill in itself. Learn how to interview, don't just get it for free.
Yeah, interviewing is and hiring in general is a super important topic and super hard topic. It's really hard to make it like fair and equal, but also to adapt to this topic we just discussed. One thing that we do, I know, at Funding Circle, and that I try to do when I do interview is you want to know what the person can do rather than making sure you find what they can't do. So if you think about that, not only how you will ask those questions, but also your process and the tasks you give to people. If we talk about hiring in tech, it's important to think about those in a way where you're going to find what the person can do rather than what they can't do. And it makes a big difference, I think.
And I think also across different levels, especially in technology, you can be hiring a junior developer, or you can be hiring a principal developer, for example. The skills you need to do those roles are a bit different. So you need to understand the hard skills, but also how you can get, as you said, Angeline, the best out of people in an interview. An interview shouldn't be a process to make someone feel really rubbish about themselves. Like they're here to see if they want to work with you. So as interviewers, the idea that you create that space that people can be themselves in that room to figure out whether they want to work with you. Technology is quite a competitive environment nowadays. So the more companies can do to make their environments inclusive for both neurodiverse and neurotypical people, just make the safe space. Safe space, make the space safe. Make the space safe, people.
So one thing that's been helpful when we get people in roles is giving them the opportunity to have a trial day. Because generally, who here is really good at interview skills, that really good at interviews? Show of hands. There's a handful of you. So, and you probably could teach other people how to be really good at interviews, which is great. But, but the bottom line is the majority of us find interviews really can be quite challenging. And sometimes it's really helpful to go beyond the interview, go beyond the, how does this person interview well, and actually can this person do the role well? Some of the times when you look at a job description, it doesn't even describe what the person's doing on a daily basis. And so giving people a fair chance includes that trial day, includes looking at the skill set that they have and taking away that whole idea of cultural fit, because it shouldn't be around them fitting into your culture. You should be having a diverse workforce anyway, and it should be about cultural add. How can this person add value to my organization? And so many things an organization can do to make sure that it's much more fair and inclusive, and it includes actually not focusing so much on the interview. I've done interviews with people and I've asked some really random questions like, what's the one question you want to answer that I haven't asked you? And it flips it a bit and it tells me something more about them that I didn't think to ask them about. And so sometimes these traditional ways of recruiting people are so totally opposite of being inclusive. And we've just kind of got to look at the practices and ways to make it much more inclusive. Oh, shit.
That's an awesome thing. We've got a Slido somewhere around superpowers. I don't know if anybody can press buttons on this screen. Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, we've got a question here for everybody at home and in the audience. What would you say your superpower is? So we were talking about earlier about people's strengths and being able to own and know things about your own strengths. And also thinking about strengths rather than challenges is starting to change the narrative around how people behave with each other, how people work in a more inclusive environment. And also positive neurodivergent traits, creativity, empathy. Some neurodivergent people are super logical. I'm logical in some regards, but also make decisions very emotionally and quite quickly. I have very little discipline in a lot of parts of my life. Oh, what a word. Listening. Oh, I love these. Nice. I want to work with you. I love knowing
Boldness
it's
is a good one. Boldness. We all need to be bold at times.
Logic, patience, non-judgment, helping, smile. I think everybody has a beautiful smile. Look at you all smiling. I hope you're smiling at home as well. I think everybody has a beautiful smile. So it lights up your eyes when you smile. Talking loudly and often, that's me. These are all. We're allowed to do what we want. We've got control of the microphones.
I'm interested in the Xbox one. Not really joking. Does anyone want to share one of? Yeah.
I feel the same in these kind of spaces. I'll try not to cry at Pia. I'll try not to cry at Pia. Does anybody else want to share?
Yeah, I put empathy, which kind of, I get what you're saying about being able to tell how people are just by look, but you can, and I think I got my diagnosis literally last year of ASD and ADHD. And for me, I think a misconception, and it goes into what you're saying about everyone that's neurodivergent is different. I think there's lots of idea that people that are neurodivergent may lack empathy, but actually it can be the complete opposite end of the spectrum. And so yeah, I just wanted to add that. That was my superpower.
Thank you so much. To the panel, share the superpowers.
I think I'm gonna say, like you, empathy for me. I think having struggled with things like depression and anxiety tends to make you a bit more tuned to that and more, have empathy for other people's feelings, whether good feelings or more negative feelings. So I would say that empathy for me.
Trying to get something from the list and thinking, oh, which one's good? I think there's an element of Googling, a lot of trying to figure out stuff. I don't like to not know how to do something, so I'll spend extra long trying to figure it out, even though somebody next to me could have the answer. I kind of want to find my own way as well. So I guess curiosity, which killed the cat, but yeah, hopefully. Yeah, no, oh, look at that. What was it? Curiosity didn't kill the cat, it made it into a lion. Silence. No, but yeah, I think curiosity is probably my one.
Humor as a defense mechanism, I think, is probably mine. You can tell, yeah, you can tell because I'm sitting up here making terrible jokes. I think that's.
I think they're great.
So, yeah, but you just said you like dad jokes, so that doesn't fulfill me with a lot of confidence, I have to say.
The groan that happens after a dad joke is like the best part of it.
That's what you aim for, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I aim
think
for, people getting bored of my jokes. But it's fine.
No, I'd probably like them. No, I think a willingness to learn. I think I've changed careers, and I'm actually like, sometimes, you know, when you have those moments where you're just sitting in your own life and you're just a bit like, is this it? Like, so sometimes I have to just take stock that yeah, like I have put myself, you know, I could have not done what I've done, but actually my sheer determination, like my dogged determination and stubbornness, I would say, is probably my superpower. Yeah. I don't think my mum thinks it's a good thing, but I do. Like, I think it is a superpower. And bringing that into the recruitment process, having a look at some of these awesome superpowers, what considerations can companies make to widen the pool of people they're looking for to attract diverse people or diverse talent, especially neurodivergent humans? Of course.
So many. I think there's so many. I'm speaking to a few people in the room, and it's not about the traditional path and linear path that people have gone through that makes them great candidates. It's that diversity of learning, and like you said, you've gone through different career changes, and that's helped you to be the person you are today. And I think it's just going beyond the traditional. They went to university, which nothing against anyone that went to university, but then they followed the path. It's more so around, like for me, I did a meditation certification. I did EFT, which is the tapping thing. I went through a whole coaching and training stage, and then I was freelancing as a trainer, and then I got recruited from the company that I am with now, just delivering training and coaching. And then because I then figured out some patterns, I became CEO within 12 months. And so CIO, not CEO, so Chief Innovation Officer, just a little bit below CEO. Still impressive, right? And it's purely because a person or organization not looking at you as having to have certain criteria, but recognizing the strengths that you bring and seeing how you can add value. And I think for me, I literally was a uni dropout, and I didn't necessarily think academia was my path. But I learned to be curious and learned to look at different things. And I think it's just the ability for an employer to see that individual and all the great gifts they bring to the workplace and how that can add value. And I think that's the important piece of really making it an inclusive space for all. And knowing that actually I worked for a company called Expedia years ago as a business development manager. And I generated like 150 million pounds in new business sales within 2 years of working there. They wouldn't have recruited me if they just like looked at me face value. They saw something in me. And I think being able to see something in someone and believing in them and giving them the support, they can excel. And that's all people really need. Somebody to believe in them.
I think this would be a good opportunity to just kind of drop in masking as well as I don't know, one thing that I got told growing up was that I have a male brain. So I don't think I'm actually very good at masking. But I know that that's something that a lot of people, especially women and especially neurodivergent people, are kind of used to doing, and it's an interesting topic, I think. So it's trying to kind of create a space where you don't have to do that, where you don't have to mask, and I think that would be, I don't know how you do that, but I just wanted to like open up that chat as well, because I know that that's something that probably a lot of y'all do on a day-to-day basis, just to fit into the really tight normals that we've created for ourselves. So yeah.
And I think masking for me is you see how other people behave and you behave like them to fit in. And when you've got a different working brain, it becomes easier but harder to be somebody else, because you don't necessarily know, because you're meant to fit into these boxes and these spaces that don't fit. So at the point in time where you find out, oh, I don't actually have to act like this, and going back to that safe space thing in this room, I don't think I would have done this a couple of years ago. And the fact that I feel safe in this space is testament to the people that are in this room wanting to listen to us. So thank you so much for being here with us. And one final thing that I want to finish on with you folks is, what are your hopes for the future to support mental health and neurodiversity?
I think for me, I would like to see businesses start putting their money where their mouth is. I think I've mentioned it before, and I just think that's something that our NHS, my mum's a nurse, so as she keeps putting it, which is really depressing, is it's on its last legs. And I think it is really struggling. And I think some big businesses they need to start investing. It's not just about investing in the recruitment process. I think it's about investing in that kind of funding and support for people that won't otherwise get the chance. So for me, that's what I want to start seeing a bit more of, if I'm honest. Yeah.
And I think a little stat before we go any further, which I was meant to read you earlier. The Wall Street Journal, Forbes and McKinsey all highlighted over the last few years that diverse teams drive innovation, and it actually boosts profitability by 33%. So creating safe spaces that people can be themselves and actually do the things that they want to do actually can improve the bottom line. So you do the right thing and companies make more money. So there's like a win-win for everybody for being nice and kind to each other.
I think it's getting that education into schools as well. And again, I think that's something companies can support. I think, especially coming from a female, you know, I can't speak on behalf of non-binary people, but that's obviously a whole other area. It's you get conditioned, so you get socialized as a female or you get socialized as a male, and it's amazing the different things. I promised I wouldn't do this, but there is a point. I did ask when I was 3 for a big digger, and my mum, to her credit, went, "Are you sure?" And Craig and Scott next door had one, and I wanted one, and I was really lucky that my mum got me a big digger, and it was great. It was the best thing ever. You could drop it and dig. Anyway, the point is, I got told I had a male brain when I was younger, and I think I was really lucky my parents didn't force me to be a girl. And I think if we could have that kind of education at lower levels of not socializing children as one gender or another, and start to introduce STEM subjects and start to give people equal opportunities in schools. And I think that requires funding and money. And I think that's where these companies can start. They might not see the benefits straight away, but they will in 10 years time. And if they're planning on sticking around 10 years time, they're going to thank themselves. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
I love that. What I like about that was that you added your story, and it was just, I think everyone can remember their childhood memories, and that's helpful. But I guess what comes to mind for me is not seeing an individual as one thing, and going through the intersectional lens and seeing them as a whole person. And that would mean an organization actually not trying to fit a person in a box. And that just takes them going from a really traditional way of looking at inclusion and being a bit more innovative in their approach to it, seeing how they can actually not only show what they want to see in the world that's changed, but also change a narrative of having to fit in to belong. You don't have to fit in to belong. I think that whole narrative has to change as well, recognizing that everyone brings value for who they are on the individual level.
I think for me, it would have to be about the stigma and it being broken, hopefully, more than it already is. If you're lucky to work somewhere or to be in an industry where it is not like what is a bit better than in other industry. But yeah, I think my hope would be that it becomes as normal to talk about neurodivergence or mental struggle than it is to talk about any other topics.
And I think it all starts with one person doing one thing, because if we can all do one kind thing for another person, then how many people are in this room today? If we all did one kind thing for another person that isn't in this room, we've doubled the amount of kind things that we've done for other people. Thank you so much for being here. I think there's some questions maybe. Is that it?
Thank you, everyone. That was really, really eye-opening and inspiring. We are now going to switch to live Q&A. So the Slido link from before, there might be some questions that come up on the screen, or I can just walk around with this microphone, and if anyone wants to ask the panel anything. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I have two very young children, 2 and 4. You've all mentioned about schools doing more, to kind of, to educate our children and help. What kind of things do you think they can be doing with young children at schools, if we were to take away something that they could implement immediately to make a positive impact?
So I used to do some work with STEMettes, and they do events in schools. And actually I spoke to a school a little while ago about using agile practices. And this is how you build software. And we use Lego to build software. And we were talking about, I think we're building giraffes and lions and all that kind of stuff. And I think it's going back to that box thing. We're not stuck, we shouldn't be stuck in boxes, and that starts from a really young age. So how do we embrace creativity with children? And things like Lego, old versions of Lego, when you didn't have to build like Star Wars things, which are cool for some people. I like building just boxes with Lego, have the best time. But so cool. And also that it stayed the same for years. Like an old Lego brick will still connect with a brand new one. Oh, amazing. But I think also for me, allowing children to embrace their creativity would be something like that through things like Lego.
Maybe some questions coming through on Slido. How do you get through a bad day? Sometimes it's just exhausting being neurodiverse.
I mean, it's hard because one tip that I would do for me would obviously not necessarily work for everyone, but I think trying to get like self-knowledge, self-awareness, thank you, that's the word I was looking for. Self-awareness is really helpful in those cases. If you know what works for you, if you know that, I don't know, if I don't know, taking time for yourself helps you, or on the contrary, taking time not by yourself but with people helps you. I would like discover what works for you would be my tip there.
Validating that bad day, actually acknowledging, actually, I'm not trying to repress, had a bad day, but actually acknowledging it. I think oftentimes we try to repress our feelings, we try to validate what we're feeling. And I think if you have a person that you can speak to, or even if you journal, meditate on it, use some mindfulness techniques, there's so many things you could do. But I guess the bottom line is to not invalidate yourself and actually lead into why it was a bad day and what you can do to minimize it being another bad day tomorrow.
I think for me, I think I would absolutely agree with that. There's some practical things you can do as well. If you've got a flexible working policy, maybe just call it a day early. Just say to your manager, I'm not productive today. And if you've got the luxury of doing that, you know, if you're not doing shifts or anything like that, yeah, especially in software, it's agile, go home, maybe work from home, maybe take the afternoon off and work from home rather than stay in the office. One thing I'll do is I'll tell my colleagues, I'm not in a good mood today. And it's not like don't approach me, it's just more of a just in case, like, and also by saying it out loud is quite helpful as well. But again, that's not for everyone, but it also just gives people an opportunity to, if they want to avoid me, maybe, I don't know, or if I am a bit snappy with them, they're aware that, you know, and obviously I really try hard not to be, but you know, sometimes you get frustrated in a meeting, or you kind of, maybe your emotional regulation's not quite on point. Like, your colleagues know it's not personal, it's not them, and so that they don't take it on board, and you're kind of making it like, and it also kind of to that point of allowing other people to have that space to say, oh, I'm not having a good day. Actually, it's like, where am I today? One of my product managers said, she's called Paris, and someone asked her, how many Parises out of 10 do you feel today? And it's kind of a good question. It's like, I'm like 2 Mhairis out of 10 today. Maybe don't talk to me if you can help it. Like,
I can take the lead so you can answer some of the questions too, if you want. How can we vet companies that you'd like to work with?
There are websites like Glassdoor. Also speaking to people. LinkedIn, for example, is a really great space for you to be able to find people that work in that company. And something that we were speaking about earlier around being able to have a day in the office with that company, especially in the environment that we work in, especially technology roles. I don't know if everybody works in technology. I'm speaking specifically for technology. It's quite a competitive environment, so you have just as much right to vet that company as they do to vet you. So yeah, things like LinkedIn or speaking to people in that environment, Glassdoor, the internet is your friend here. And also events like this. You can just talk to people. Yeah. That's okay. I'm glad you only spoke small sentences so I could repeat afterwards. Do your organisations know you're neurodivergent, and how do they support you? Yes, they do. And I think for me, it was a really brave acknowledgement, I think, on my part, and also to acknowledge in this room that it was a brave thing for me to do. And I hope by being able to do that, I can help somebody else do that, either in my workspace or in this event. They support me by giving me the space to be myself. And yeah, I'm trying to work out how they do that. I don't know. I think going right back to the beginning of talking about psychological safety, the people that I work with, I feel safe to speak to across the organisations that I work with. So I work in consultancy, and the retailer that I work with at the moment, again, creates a safe space for the people that we work with, both from a client perspective and within the consultancy, the ability to speak to each other on a human level rather than a hierarchical level. I think that's also very important.
So I work for a scale up. So everything is a bit messy at the moment because we're moving at pace. So we're kind of like, I've been sent out as a bit of a, I think this is something we want to adopt more. So I've been sent out on a bit of a learning mission. So I'm going to be like pulling a lot of this back because I've learned from these fine people here on the panel with me. So I've got a meeting with our people director when I get back to try and kind of build some of this practical stuff in and some of the emotional support side of it as well. So yeah, we're very much at a learning stage, I think, and I'm just really happy that the company sent me along because I'm super vocal, so I'll be making this note when I get back. And it's nice that they're willing to learn, but yeah, we've got a long way to go. So.
Workplace needs assessments, workplace needs assessments, workplace needs assessments. So that's how our company support with me. I came in saying I was neurodivergent. They knew it from the get-go. It made a lot of things easier. And support is like when I'm in meetings, if I'm not having a really good day, I get to have my camera off. I get to just say, not having a great day. When it comes to me having to get clarity from a meeting, I get to say, okay, what's the action points here? Just being able to articulate what I need out of the meeting, being able to have the agendas before, being able to recognize that actually I need notice in order to deliver a workshop. I can't just be doing it willy-nilly type thing. So those are small things that don't cost the company anything, but then obviously workplace needs assessments give me the technology I need in order to be at my best. And I get to play with tech as part of my job anyway. So that's really helpful. But generally, it's like that mutual understanding from colleagues that they want me to win and I want them to win. And that's just really helpful.
Yep, some of the things that haven't been mentioned yet that I can think of for me is a good work-life balance. The company I work for, Funding Circle, is quite good at having a good work-life balance. And I think that's also really helpful.
I think we've got time for a couple more questions. I don't know if there's any that you all want to answer individually or choose from. Any that we haven't answered that we do normally run a little bit of a poll after post-event.
I like this one. How can you be open about your neurodiversity without being too open and having people judge you or think you're using it as an excuse to skip off? Love it. The reason why I love this question is because it comes from a place of actually knowing who you are. When you know your strengths, you know what you bring, you know the value you add, even if people still have that perception, it's none of your business, because it's almost like, well, that's more your problem than it is mine. And I think just owning what your strengths are, owning what you bring and being able to articulate that in a way that's confident. And confidence is a muscle, right? It's not something you generally wake up and say, I'm a confident person. You decide in that moment, I get to be confident in this moment. And so the judgment piece is probably because you're judging yourself, harsh, but probably true, because normally when we're judging others, it's because we're judging ourselves and we've got other things that we need to resolve. And if anyone kind of comes with the whole you're trying to give off, you can just say HR, please. Or even if it's not a HR thing, it's just knowing how to self-advocate for yourself. Actually, I'm not trying to give off. My neurodivergence means that I just need you to be very clear with me so that I get to do my best work. There's no other discussion type thing. Does anyone else want to add to that question?
No, I like that point though about I just think, yeah, I worry about that all the time. I'm constantly worrying. Like I'm still worrying in my head about half the things I probably said tonight that I probably shouldn't have or worded better. So yeah, what people think of you is none of your business is the best bit of advice I've been given. And I think that's a really good point, Amy, just to back that up.
Final one.
Connecting with us, I guess LinkedIn, socials, anyone that wants to, I can give you my number or details after. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. It was super insightful. I know you didn't answer anything wrong. Thank you to everyone also who's joined us virtually. And also a huge thank you to Funding Circle who have collaborated on this event and provided all the food and drink. We're going to be doing some networking afterwards. So I see lots of wine, soft drinks, cupcakes left for you to all to enjoy. There is going to be a short feedback survey. Alfie's already kindly shared the QR code, which we'd really, really appreciate you filling in just to let us know what you thought. We're constantly looking for new and innovative ways to host these events, topics that you would like to hear from us. So do kind of let us know. But for now, yeah, I'm going to leave everyone to enjoy the last of the food and drinks and carry on this conversation.